Great. I think we'll crack on. Just let somebody else in. All good. Well, look, thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Phil. I'm Garth. We've had a brilliant few weeks actually of some really amazing things. Listening to some great stories about what it means to be a better business, and every week we've been covering every section of the B Corp assessments, which covers customers, your people, environment, government, and help me out, one more, community. There you go, community. But what's been really interesting is all of those things are interlinked. And so today we kind of pull all those things together in the form of governance. So today it's about what it means to be a better business. Today we have Phil and Garth, as I mentioned. So quick intro from me. I'm Gina Mula. I'm a founder of a company called Mulashaker with my brother Mel. I'm a creative agency founder, so founded and ran a creative agency for 10 years, working with global brands, designing and building brand experiences. And my brother Mel brings a kind of global corporate experience in transforming businesses. And we kind of pulled those two together into Mulashaker, bringing design and change together. And it's our mission to help businesses activate change through purposeful design, empowered people, and delivering cultural change. We're a pending B Corp, and as Hannah said, I'm also a B leader. I met Hannah and Phil actually on the B Leaders course that we were on recently. So straight into it, I'm going to introduce Phil and Garth. Phil, if you are there. Hi, Phil. Welcome. Phil, can you give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and what you currently do, and yeah, what your experience is?
Yeah, sure. Hi, guys. Great to be here. Great series of conversations and things are popping up on social over the last month or so for B Corp Month. So yeah, so I'm Phil. So I've been working within the sustainability agenda for quite a while. Came into it before, I guess, the business sustainability conversation was really sort of happening. So I started my career in consulting, what many people did in the late 90s, early 2000s in environmental consultancy, and that very quickly sort of that landscape started to change quite massively, and it sort of started to shift sort of into sort of, I guess, into CSR and more broadly into this much broader holistic sustainability conversation topic. So I shifted in-house in 2006. I got the opportunity to work on the London Olympics and Paralympics and manage that strategy for sustainability, and sort of lucky to see that from start to finish. And I've been in-house ever since then, really. So I've sort of went from there into supporting Kingfisher, the home improvement retailer, obviously in the UK, that's B&Q and Screwfix. From there into M&S, and currently working for the parent company for Boots in the UK. But I look after a portfolio of brands in the health and beauty space, including not just the Boots own label, but also the big consumer brand being Number 7. I've taken one of my brands through the B Corp process, Aromatherapy Associates. I've got another brand about to start, but I've been involved in the B Corp movement since it's been in the UK, really. I sit on their multinational advisory group. I'm also as Hannah and Gina's kind of, I'm also a B leader on my own right as well. So, and then I'm sort of extracurricular-wise, I'm on the board of the B Corp, the Resource Futures, a sort of a waste and resource organisation based down in Bristol. So I'm sort of steeped in the sort of the B Corp movement, but also sort of on a broader sort of business agenda. So hello, that's me.
Thanks, Phil. You mentioned a really interesting word earlier, CSR, which people now deem a dirty word, but the conversations around today are really about how purpose is driving change, and how CSR really doesn't really exist anymore in its original form. how have you seen the change from CSR now and going towards purpose driving business?
So I think it's a really good good question, actually, because there's still a lot of confusion out there and there's still a lot of conflation. So for me, CSR is almost part of this topic or part of the wider sustainability agenda, and sort of even pushing beyond sustainability, really. But they're not the same. For me, CSR is very here and now, and sort of what are sort of some of the things that business should be doing, or sort of doing the right thing. And it's almost sort of I guess it's kind of thinking about the things that you can do outside of your business to contribute, but it's not necessarily actually making your business better. So it's not necessarily taking things into kind of rethinking how you can make your business more future fit. So I think so I would not necessarily pitch them at odds with each other. I would say that CSR is almost a foundational piece to sort of then kind of move you on. And actually, there's lots of companies that, and this isn't a criticism, it's just reality, where they leap straight into thinking about really big thinking and progressive actions without doing some of the basics. So I think it's, for me, CSR is about doing some of the basics.
Thanks, Phil. That's great. Garth, let's introduce you. Honestly, I was trying to write the copy for the introduction to you both on LinkedIn. I actually had to reduce it. I couldn't get it all on. Your expertise between the two of you was just so vast. But Garth, can you introduce yourself, please, and just give us a bit of an intro of what you're doing with the Good Business Festival?
Well, thank you very much, Gina. Thanks, Hannah, for inviting me here. I'm Garth Dallas. If I want to give you the full name, I'm Garth Orlando Dallas. So my initials are G-O-D, but I take no credit for that. My parents obviously have a great sense of humor, but I've used it as best as I can. It's a very good icebreaker. But the important thing to follow on from what you said there, Gina, is that I've never been one-dimensional. I've always looked to expand as widely as I possibly can. I was born in Jamaica. I studied chemical engineering, believe it or not, in a place called Hungary. And that was where my real awakening happened, when I was cast into what was then behind the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe, studying chemical engineering and having to deal with all the changes that were going on in the world around that time, whether it be the changes in the Soviet Union, the changes in Czechoslovakia, as it was then, Yugoslavia. And it became very clear to me that I wasn't there to just study chemical engineering. I was growing up so quickly. And when I left Hungary, I came back to the UK. I had lots of family here and I settled here. And it became my life journey to ensure that the prejudices and the various nuances which I've faced whilst surviving in Eastern Europe would dictate my life and my life work. I did an MBA, and that's where I started to look closely into business modeling and what is the purpose of business. A trained, qualified solicitor, and I specialize in the Equality Act 2010. What that tells you, you can see there, is that my whole world is about not just the compliance side, where you shouldn't do X, Y, and Z, otherwise you're going to be sued in court, but I focus more on the other side, which is the right way to behave, the right thing to do, and it's all about people focus. And in any business unit, and trust me, I do a lot of engagement with businesses to not just stop them from being sued in an employment tribunal, but also how to develop a business which, as Phil said, is fit for purpose, but also fit for the future. So with the Good Business Festival, let me give you a quick background. That festival started life as the International Festival for Business in 2014. Liverpool was given that contract by central government as part of the whole devolution plan that created Liverpool City Region. And they started the festival in 2014 as the International Festival for Business. I pitched then to do an event around competitive advantage by immersing diversity and inclusion in the business process. They didn't have a clue what I was talking about. What is this, God? They were only talking about how much inward investment they can get from China. It was all about, you know, the numbers. Diversity and inclusion? What the hell is that? By 2016, it was a biannual conference. 2016, the same thing. I was put aside and I had to do some fringe events. By 2018, the dial was changing. And they realized that the world was changing. So when I pitched again to do a involvement around diversity and inclusion, particularly around supply chain, and the language was easier to understand that trade had to be the way forward for Liverpool City Region, but trade, not just for trade's sake, but to ensure that the supply chain is looked into and ensure that it's diverse. So I was on the main stage by then. So 2020, when the festival came back, by then it was changed to the Good Business Festival, and they advertised for a head of collaboration. And because I was always in the background, slagging them off for all the stuff that they weren't doing right, I held my hand up and said, okay, I am now going to be part of the change that I want to see. So I came on board as the head of collaboration for the Good Business Festival. The Good Business Festival is basically about creating a platform for mature discussions around the good business movement. Good business movement is not something that's just been developed over the last couple of years. It's been going on for a while, but now businesses realize that the only way that they're going to survive going forward is to join the movement and understand what is purpose, understand what is the triple bottom line, understand that without people and a people-focused, people-centered business ecosystem, your business is not sustainable. And that's the driving force. That's what I've been doing for the last year. COVID meant that we had to separate the festival into Act 1 and Act 2. Act 1 was in October last year. It was a digital conference. We're now moving towards Act 2 in July 2021. That's enough about my introduction. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Garth. What's really interesting, you know, what brings us all here, we're all from completely different backgrounds, different sectors, different expertise. I work with global brands. I saw incredible amount of waste, very campaign driven. It went in, it went out, it went in again, it went out, all to drive and drive consumer trends and behaviors to purchase constantly. And my driver now is to use design in a very different way, to look at the end of life first. And what Mel brings to the table is how we can drive the conversation in a much more productive way. How do we make it more efficient? How do we make it more effective? How do we make it more purpose-led? How do we bring teams together? How do we bring diversity together to drive innovation? How do we celebrate differences in thought, differences in ideas, make people feel safe in an environment so they can drive innovation, particularly when there's disruption happening all around us? Phil, you've had many, many years working with corporates. So we've got obviously very different types of companies. You've got huge corporates, we've got SMEs, we've got startups. I'm sure the Good Business Festival is full of all of those. Phil, have you seen real change in the corporates? Last week we had Paul De Silva from Friends of the Earth, and he was really talking about, you know, the big leaders really need to start leading change. everybody else is trying very hard around them to do that, but it really needs to be the big hitters to really drive that change. In your experience, are you seeing that happening?
I think we are. I think if you look at things in isolation, there's some good stuff happening. Whether some of those things are happening on a scale which is actually able to bring about, to use a jargon term, systemic change is another matter. So just yesterday, I saw something pop up on my social feed. Some of you might have seen it as well. And I don't know whether it actually hit yesterday, which is whether it just hit my social feed, but Greenpeace coming out of their report sort of questioning how impactful some of the certification schemes had been on tackling deforestation. So things like FSC, RSPO, the soy movements, particularly around Roundtable for Sustainable Soy, for example, and really questioning actually whether they were whether some of those certificates, I mean, the headline was kind of almost Greenpeace saying, these certification schemes are kind of greenwashing. However, I think if you look at kind of some of what's behind some of that activity, and this is about whole scale change and wholesale system change, and ideally sort of changing the market dynamics. And that doesn't happen necessarily overnight. We don't have a world government, very far from it. All of the issues we're talking about are cross border, and I sort of believe we're in a kind of a world where collaboration is the new competition. Now the problem is that there's not as much of that going on as it could be, and there's still a little bit of not invented here syndrome going on, where companies kind of go, oh, well, we don't want to do that, we'll do our own thing because we want to get credit and plaudits for that. So, and also some of when you're looking at some of the challenges around how you think big and how you think at a strategic level, and particularly this really complex, messy systems that we're talking about, that's not the easiest to get your head around, let alone communicate to exec level. Plastics has been a game changer really, because people can see it. It's easy for people to get their head around. You can see it in real time. Other topics are a bit more challenging. So I think has there been isolated pockets of activity? You can name check them all: Patagonia, Unilever, IKEA. There are absolutely, I have to say, you're not going to like it, probably Amazon. They have, if you look at kind of what some of those companies are investing, love them or hate them, they are doing some really big impactful stuff. Equally, the small players and smaller businesses have got a big role to play as well, on a different lens. And actually, it's not a case of saying, oh, big businesses can sort this, and because actually we've all got a role to play. We've just got different roles to play, and actually it's how that joins up. What I think is happening, definitely happening, and I think the B Corp movement is a bit of a testament to this, is that I'd say 90% of my career, and probably a similar sort of percentage of businesses out there, this agenda is about how you're pushing a purposeful approach in a largely non-purposeful environment, and that's just fact. That conversation is, I think, starting to change, and I think there is a recognition that there's a different way to do business, and which is absolutely about making money, but actually making money from a different lens on a broader perspective. So actually, can you actually move a purposeful approach within a purposeful environment? And I think we haven't quite. I wouldn't quite say there's a bit of a renaissance there yet, but I think that is definitely, we're on a path to that. And I think there's a number of big players, and you only have to look at the B Corp movement alone in the UK. I think I'm right in saying there's about 1,000 companies going through the process.
Yeah.
So I think you only have to look at that lens, and big players around this. Are we seeing the scale of sort of change that we need and the pace of change that we need? Probably not. And you look at the 3 big SDGs that I always point to, which are going in the wrong direction: climate, responsible consumption and production, and reduced inequalities. Those 3 are going in the wrong direction.
It's interesting. So that the news over the last week about the alleged human rights issues in China and how the brands are responding to that. I had an ex-client from Nike on one of our webinars a few weeks ago, who's part of the procurement team at Nike, who now have a purpose. She's leading the purpose part of procurement now, which is I wouldn't say is a new thing, but they're actually putting a stake in the ground and then naming it purpose. It's around people, planet, and play. Mm-hmm. And it would just be really interesting to see how the bigger brands respond or are responding to the events in China. Inditex are being criticised for putting a statement out there and then retracting it, and seeing how consumers are going to react, you know, through their spend, whether they're really going to have a view on that.
Well, I think you know, we're not a big cotton user, but we're having those conversations. We've got positions on it. The facts are that there is a yeah, for big brands, a lot of big brands, you know, it's a dilemma in terms of China and that part of the world is a growth market, but then you've got to marry that. How does that play out with your ethics? It is a interpretation of what is and isn't forced labor.
Yeah,
is what's playing out. So the Chinese are sort of saying that they do not consider what they're doing to be forced labor, whereas international law would say otherwise. But that is absolutely, and when you think that you know, 20% of the world's cotton comes from, 20% of the world's cotton comes from Xinjiang, and 80% of China's cotton comes from Xinjiang, and the global cotton industry that we have and the way that commodity is traded, plus you've obviously got Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan as being issues already with state-sponsored forced labour and child labour. If each of us are wearing cotton, high chance it's come from Xinjiang or Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan. Fact.
Yeah, massive. So we've got incentives like the Good Business Festival, Garth, where trying to create diverse thoughts, expertise, people from different sectors around the table. You know, you said that came about because we needed to drive that change. What are you seeing that's making a big difference through things like the Good Business Festival?
The Good Business Festival is a platform that, as I said, that is not afraid of tackling some of the very serious and sometimes controversial issues. We're not here to preach as to what good is. What we say is that it's a process and it's not necessarily perfection. So we bring various organizations together to have those discussions and to share knowledge. And as Phil said, collaboration is the new competition. But what we have is the power to promote organizations that on various spectrum are doing well in various areas. We understand that as far as business is concerned, if you're even looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, and the reason why I love to always bring it back to the Sustainable Development Goals is because finally the world, public sector, governments, private, social sector have a common language that can be utilized to have a discussion around what we should be doing around the triple bottom line, what we should be doing around the planet, what should we be doing around people, alleviation of poverty, clean water, etc. That language, we understand that there will be trade-offs. There will be trade-offs for businesses. So we have to be able to have that mature discussion with businesses that there are certain things that they will do that will generate environmental benefit, say, a pharmaceutical company, for example, that is producing medicine that is providing satisfying a need for affordable medicine, if you like. But then you look closer, you realize that that company is probably sourcing its water or production in an area where there's a scarcity of the waterbed. So they're having problems on other aspects of the sustainable development goals. So what we try to do with those businesses is to at least get them to understand what effect their operations can have on a macro scale, a global scale, and work with them, if you like, to see how they can mitigate the negative effects. So that's what the Good Business Festival is doing. But here's another thing that COVID has made even more relevant. A lot of businesses are now having to look at onshoring their supply chain, localizing their supply chain. We realized when COVID broke out that there was this massive clamor across the world for PPE, and these strategic supply chains were at risk. So we're now saying to businesses, if you are genuinely, for reputational purposes, saying that you are on the path to doing well, and you're people focused and you're looking after your people, we're now saying to them, we want you now, because we're promoting you and we're giving you this platform as a Good Business Festival, which is great for your reputation. We're saying to you, we're holding them to account and say, all right, we've got a bunch of smaller businesses, micro and small businesses that we're also bringing on this journey. You now need to open up your supply chain. You now need to get these businesses to understand how they can become suppliers to your organization, even if it may cost a little bit more for them to source the stuff from China. We're saying to them, in the short to medium term, put in place strategies where you can support the local ecosystem. And that is the collaboration that we're holding businesses to account. And guess what? It's not been difficult. And that is the positive thing that I'm bringing to today's message, that businesses are waking up to the fact that profit and purpose can run hand in hand. In fact, we said purpose before profit. Because if you define your purpose, why do you exist? A lot of businesses didn't even know why they exist. But when you drill it down, what are you here for? What societal needs are you here to satisfy? That is when businesses understand that for them to be sustainable going forward, millennials are now making decisions as to which companies they're going to work for based on whether they believe that's a good company or not. So if you're not doing the right things, you're going to dry up on the best talent. Consumers are now making decisions as to where they're going to spend their money based on whether or not they believe that company is a good company or not. So whether the businesses like it or not, that is the way business in the 21st century is going. They have to change, otherwise they will not survive. And that's the language that businesses understand, by the way. It's not just about measuring your financial rewards, which is great because you're always feeding that into your business on a day-to-day basis, so you can pull that off anytime. But how do you measure your environmental income, if you like? How do you measure the other aspects? And that's what we're teaching businesses going forward. And that's why the B Corp is also a great tool, because that's embedded very much into it. And to come on to governance, we believe that the fish rot from the head. So you have to have CEO buy-in. You have to have leadership buy-in into this process. It can't be left to HR. It can't be left to department head. If the leadership of the organization isn't committed and doesn't see the benefit, then it's not going to be sustainable.
Oh, I love it. You know, I've had numerous conversations with business owners, and the first thing they say to me is, we've got a great culture, but I've got a real problem with people leaving. Or we've got a really great culture, but oh yeah, we don't pay sick days. And I think this lack of understanding of what a great culture means. And interestingly, I was looking on the Great Places to Work website and about what they define a great place to work is, and it is around community, but it's around unity, and then what you do give back to the community as a business. It's about being fair, so it's allowing your people to be heard, valued and respected. It's about having a management team that are trustworthy, because that drives employee retention and motivation. So there's no them and us. It's very transparent. Creates innovation. So safe environments to express ideas, inspire loyalty, confidence, the willingness to give extra. To your point, Carl, this is what millennials are looking for when they're looking to work for good companies. And it's all around trust as well. So that trusting, you know, treating your people not as commodities or as honeybees, as an ex-MD once described us all as, which was horrendous. I did leave shortly after that, and set up my own company. But you know, those conversations, people just don't accept, I think now, that type of language anymore, and I love it. And I think it's those kind of conversations that drive inspired, motivated people to make the world a better place. So I'm loving it.
Gina, I saw a list of the companies that have done best throughout the pandemic, and the common denominator in those in that list. Okay, there were majority tech companies and stuff like that, because a lot of stuff were pivoted online. But the common denominator was the fact that those companies looked after their people throughout the pandemic. If you look after your people, they will look after your customers. If you look after your customers, they will also look after your bottom line. It is as simple as that. We were worried as to whether or not we could trust our employees to work from home. Are they really going to be working from home whilst they're still employed company? They realized after a couple of months that, hang on a minute here, production hasn't only been maintained, but it's been improved. And what they then had to do, the good companies, is to channel their resources to make sure that the well-being of their employees, whilst they're working from home, the lonesomeness and all the various stuff that goes with that, were taken care of. They could have regular team meetings or whatever, and just having a bit of a day when they have some quizzes online or whatever. Those employees felt that they were part of a movement, a company that looked after them, so they gave more. And at the end of the day, the bottom line was measured and they did well. So there is enough to be optimistic about, in my opinion.
We've got a brilliant example, actually. A friend of mine, Andrew Russell, is on here now, and he was on the community webinar, family-owned business, create beauty products on the Isle of Arran in Scotland, where they took care of the whole island and gave away free products. And then in return of that, because they just thought of the community first, that community now has responded, and Andrew's company survived the pandemic in a time where they pretty much lost 100% of their income, and now they've jumped back. And it's a really brilliant example of how a business just put the community first, and it's proven the point of what you've said exactly there, Garth. Phil, just going back to you then, on a corporate company level, Walgreens Alliance, huge company. Can the corporates really get involved on a community level and impact change on a local level, or are they just too big to do that?
So I think it depends on the business, but I think yes, broadly. I mean, even you only have to look at Amazon now making moves into bricks and mortar. You got 2 Amazon Fresh stores opened up in London recently. So even they're moving into physical space. So within the sustainability agenda, there is a global and there is a local context to that. So even if you when you develop a strategy, if you're global, there are goals that you would obviously be focused on, but actually your markets are going to be very different. Even though some of the goals there may be a consistency in terms of things like plastics, climate, biodiversity, human rights, even the whole DEI agenda, the way in which you would then look to sort of progress that within different territories is going to be different. The DEI agenda in Asia is clearly going to be very different in a Western context. Part of the issue we're just talking about, touched on briefly on Xinjiang, is probably playing out a difference between the China view and the Western view of kind of what is and isn't appropriate, right? So there's different ways of doing that. But what we do have is obviously we do have the SDGs, which provide that sort of common international view of ideally where we should be heading. And then it's down to the brands and the companies, whether you're small, whether you're large, to start to localize that. And I think when you're looking at, we've got a very different, very much in the UK, the high street alone is going to look very different when we come out of this. So I think it was already on its knees pre-pandemic, let's be honest. And I think we're going to look at a very different high street as we come out of it. And I suspect a lot of brands will move into more of a blended way of working, I would imagine. So I don't think you're already starting to see repurposing of space and retail premises as well in terms of having a community feel. So when you look at it from a community point of view, I think there's 2 lenses to that. There's how is any sort of business activity, how's that linked to whatever the purpose of the business is, and what are the things they're going to focus on? How does that really help further whatever it is they want to stand for? That's one lens. The other lens is, I guess, arguably more philanthropic, which is sort of what are the things that the business might want to do, which actually, to be honest, is kind of much as about employee engagement and customer engagement as anything else, which may just also happen to have a community benefit, and kind of how those marry up in the local agenda. It's really interesting. Purpose is definitely, to Garth's point, absolutely business critical, whether you're small or large, multinational or other. I guess the big reflection I've got, having gone through the pandemic, and God help us, let's hope we don't go through another one, although let's be honest, it was the top of the World Economic Forum's global risks for a good few years. It's just the fact that many businesses weren't actually, and most governments for that matter, weren't probably fully prepared for it, even though it was probably top of the list of top of the global risks. I guess the question I have is, and you might argue this is one and the same, but I'm not sure it is purpose good enough? Because actually you've got to be purposeful, but you've also got to be useful. You can be the most purposeful business in the world, but are you actually useful, and are you resilient? And are you going to have a business that can withstand everything that throws? I mean, I'm talking from a beauty perspective. Let's be honest, our beauty sales fell off a cliff. So, and I'm sure many smaller beauty brands were facing into that during the pandemic. So how do you but then equally, I know other beauty brands have repurposed their business and started doing hand sanitizer lines and repurposing their business models to sort of pivot what they do. So I think it is marrying up how you can sort of marry up. Yes, this is about being future fit. Yes, this is about being purposeful, but how do you also become more resilient as well? Because actually my reflections are what COVID, and I'm kind of almost thought, oh, I almost didn't even question that before COVID. Oh, surely they're one and the same. Actually, they're not necessarily one and the same. And in an ideal world where everything's running the same and everything's running swimmingly, it's great, it's fine. But if a curveball hits, you might have the most solid, rock solid business case in the world, but if a curveball hits, you might find yourself in trouble. So I think that needs to be in the lexicon now for businesses. They think as they kind of start to come out of this, whether and I think that applies to whether you're a small business or a multinational business. Absolutely. I mean, digital alone has probably been, I've heard some CEOs say that digital agenda has moved on, been progressed sort of a decade because of COVID. It's also shone a real spotlight on actually how digitally prepared are some businesses. So kind of, I think, yeah, that's some of the framing to think about in the kind of context also of how you then think about your role at a local level. A lot of your employees are still going to be local, but equally, they're also going to want more flex working. They're probably wanting more blended. Does that open up more talent opportunities? And then you're going to have an interesting dilemma. And so you just want local employment opportunities. Do you want talent further afield? Yeah, all those sorts of dilemmas are going to start creeping in now, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's just reminded me, actually, putting my previous agency hat on and doing pitches and RFIs for clients, and there would always be, the question saying, do you have a disaster plan? And it was always in case your building caught on fire. And you just think, oh God, well, it's never going to happen. It's going to be fine. We'll just put some things in. But actually the disaster plan is what happens on a global level. Are you prepared now? And to your point, it's something that should be front and center for all of us in whatever role we do. Gosh, it's been great. Hannah, we've got 10 minutes. Are there any questions in the chat or anything from anyone else? Has anyone got any comments?
I haven't had any specific questions in the chat. Just talking, we've just had a few people sharing information about statistics and reports that we've looked at that are talking about, the change in business and consumers and employee engagement and things like that. So that's been really interesting. I think, it was really interesting point Phil just made then about the localized employment and remote working and things like that. What I, would suggest there's kind of almost one between employing people locally and, having the localized manufacturing and things like Garth was talking about, but then it's also offering those opportunities to unrepresented areas. I'm working with a charity that does a lot of work with Jihan, who's here, and she does communication strategy. It's a lot of discussions we have is around, that employment and remote working and, finding talent and also supporting talent in areas that may not be able to get jobs when just because of where they live, but now they have an internet connection and a laptop, there's opportunities available for them. So it's that almost that balance. And I think I've got loads of notes from the from the talk, of course, but it was, I think what really stood out there was when Phil said, is purpose good enough? You've got to be useful too. And I guess that's another question I look at when I'm looking at businesses, which is, yes, you can make a business doing that, but should you make a business doing that? Which is kind of another way to ask that question as well, because with the Better Business Network and kind of enrolling businesses and small business owners and entrepreneurs to work with us is about finding people with the same values as us. With, someone coming in to our network who wants to build a huge e-commerce empire, which is drop shipping and Amazon and based on, profit margins and not particularly based on the values or the purpose of the business, isn't the kind of business we want to be working with, regardless of how profitable that company and successful that company may be, because they just don't hold the same value system we do. So yeah, lots of interesting conversation there from everybody really. So I've got loads of notes, so if anyone does want these notes, please message me privately your email address and I'll be happy to share that with you. But yeah, I love that talk, really, really interesting. Thank you so much, Garth and Phil.
I thank you as well. I would certainly answer that question very boldly. Purpose is not enough. Purpose on its own is not enough for a business. We're not, because we're here talking about, good business and business being fit for purpose and fit for the future, doesn't mean that we're going to abandon the basic mechanisms of a business unit, which is money in, money out. You've got to have find a need that people are prepared to pay money for. So we're not going to abandon that. But what I'd like to introduce as well is the fact that what we have noticed with our work at the Good Business Festival is that the narrative between the neoliberal thinking that is all about shareholder value and the social sector is narrowing. There is a new narrative around the social solidarity economy in which social, private, and public are getting closer together. And the collaboration that I mentioned before, the new competition, is becoming a lot more streamlined because private sector companies are finding ways to work with the social sector within their communities, who, by the way, stepped up to the plate during COVID, and they were the ones that were looking after the homeless. They were the ones that feeding also the people because the local government couldn't do all of that stuff. So those relationships, we are now saying we want to formalize those relationships. And what has happened, for example, Liverpool City Region, we've now, with the Metro Mayor, created something called Liverpool City Region Social Solidarity Task Force. So we're looking to see how we can make that sustainable. So a private sector organization is CSR is not going about, painting a school or painting a church and making them feel good about themselves. Their proper social value is how they work with the social sector, how they upskill the social sector, how they provide mentorship to some of these smaller businesses. That's what we're trying to create, an ecosystem which is different, an ecosystem which understands that all these units have a role to play in the future that we want to see, the society that we want to see. Everyone have different roles, different skills, but if we all collaborate and work together, then I believe that we can create an ecosystem which can be defined as good business ecosystem.
So Gareth, how do we get involved in the Good Business Festival?
Oh, I was wondering when you were going to ask me that. I shall put my email in the chat, but it's pretty simple, thegoodbusinessfestival.com and Garth at thegoodbusinessfestival.com. My whole world is about collaboration, and I just want to bring as many people as possible into this conversation, get you all involved, and meet new people, and let's work together.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Garth. I've got a quick question here from Peter that you may have an answer to, may not. Is there evidence of other types of changes to employment and use of talent? For example, having more part-time employees and less permanent who have multiple jobs. How do you make sure the core of the business remains consistent as people flow through? We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I don't know if you could direct Peter to any sort of research or studies that you've seen or businesses that have got good systems that you might know of. Just from my point of view, Peter, I was ops director for a company called Running Remote, which is the world's largest remote work conference last year, which is now virtual this year, and it's happening in May, and tickets, they were free. I don't know if they're still free. But I'll put the link in the chat for that, because there's a lot of conversation at that conference with world-class speakers and leaders in remote first businesses. And that's a lot of the discussions are around topics such as this, about having part-time working, flexible working, working in different time zones, things like that, and how you really keep that company culture clear and your company purpose clear and look after your staff. So there's a lot in, there will be a lot in that resource and on that website that will help you, Peter, but I don't know if Phil or Garth, you've got any thoughts on that before we finish the session?
Yes, I do. There's a company called 58 Company. Have a look at that. They're a B Corp company, and it's rumored that they got the highest score of any B Corp, certainly in our region. They have something, they've created an app called just good work. And that's exactly what they do. They make sure that the supply chain is examined for modern slavery practices, and also how you treat your migrant workers or transient workers. Check them out. They're a B Corp company, 58 company, that's what they're called. And that's exactly what they're set up to do. So that's a nice plug for B Corp movement there.
Awesome, thank you.
Well, I think we're good. What do you reckon, Hannah? I was going to say any kind of last comments from you both, but you've done some massive kind of already kind of final thoughts. But I will ask one final one. So we know that good leadership is inclusive leadership, and it has to be going forward. So it's a question to both of you, and Phil, I'll come to you first. How do we unite everybody across a common goal? It's a massive question.
So from a business point of view or societal? Business?
They're kind of.
Well, I think we're, I think things are definitely shifting into, so there's, topics of conversation, which, only a few years ago, which have been fringe of mainstream, are kicking into mainstream news much more frequently. I think there is a kind of I think the challenge is that the gender generally is incredibly complicated. There's this horrible kind of acronym called VUCA, and I'm sure you've heard it before. It's volatile, uncertain, complicated, and ambiguous. So and it's only getting worse. And the issues and the intersectionality of issues are also becoming more known as well. Health and climate being one. Inclusion and environmental activity. There's a whole board of all range of things there. But the problem is that we're still quite fragmented in how we tackle this. So and there's people that kind of tackle the environmental side. There's people playing in the DEI space. There's people going in the human rights space. I think what B Corp does a nice job is to bring that all together and actually provide the framework for that all to be brought together. But ultimately, it comes down to having a really clear vision of what you're trying to get to and what you're trying to achieve to get people to rally around. So if you're in a business, even if you have a really complicated agenda, and whether you're small or large, the likelihood is that there'll still be lots of issues and it will be complicated. And you can't cherry pick, in my view. However, what you can do is sort of think about what are the things we want to really make sure are really super clear, and be really clear that what we stand for, and communicate from a vision point of view, and then have this sessions about governance, having really clear governance in place. Governance often gets overlooked actually in business in terms around sustainability. You can have a brilliant strategy, very glossy, get a creative agency and make it look pretty. Yeah. So often they're paper tigers. So actually having clear things underneath it and having a clear framework in place in there. And I think the other thing that I've noticed certainly is the role of influencers in this space, whether they're on the social side or on the more sort of broader technical sort of sustainability side. They are also increasingly influencing consumers. Mm. I used to sort of shy away from the dreaded "what do you do for a living," Phil, because I just didn't really want to get into that conversation at a barbecue. I just sort of steered away from it because I didn't want it to sort of just get into a basic environmental conversation, because that isn't really what I do. But I think that is changing. And whilst the mainstream media still play out sustainability as an environmental agenda, I think increasingly that is we are seeing a shift there. So I think business side being clear, having a super clear vision, and being really articulate around what you're trying to achieve to make sure everyone can be brought into that, and also you can make it a lot more real for people, for the role that people can have to play. And I think over time that will also trickle into sort of society and And I think you're starting to see other shifts. Sustainability isn't a trend anymore. It's a cultural shift, for sure.
And just being really honest about your journey. You don't have to think you have to move mountains, even those very small steps. As long as you're honest and transparent about that, they're macro changes are good changes.
Absolutely, and I certainly back that up quickly. We know we've only got a few seconds left, but set in place a system, have leadership buy-in, make it not a tick boxing exercise, set goals, and celebrate successes when you have achieved them, because people within your organization will feel that this is not just, oh, hey, we had on a team meeting, we have achieved the goal, we're celebrating the success, then we're going to move on to the next one. Which SDG goals are we focusing on for this quarter? How are we going to achieve it? How will we know what success looks like? Measure it, account for it, and celebrate it when you achieve it.
Brilliant. Perfect timing as well, Garth. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been brilliant. I've loved all of the sessions. I was really looking forward to today. Phil, I know you are a massively busy man, and thank you.
No, not at all. No, thank you. Thank you for having me along.
No, it's brilliant.
I think it's great that it's being done under the B Corp framing, and I think that's only going from strength to strength. So it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think the challenge for the B Corp movement is kind of almost getting an understanding of where that tipping point is and what does that look like in the UK, and that'll be fascinating.
Yeah, great. Thank you, and thank you, Garth, as well. I know another busy man, but
my pleasure. Thank you.
Really great, and thank you for joining us a few weeks ago as well. I was keen to get you back on, so thank you.
Yeah, I'm an anorak for things like these, so.
No, we'll get you back.
Okay, thank you very much.
And normally Hannah and I stay on for another 10 minutes. Don't feel obliged. If go, it's 12 o'clock, but we're going to hang out for 10 minutes. So thank you again. And
unfortunately, I have to go for a Good Business Successful team meeting, but thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you, Hannah. Take care. Bye.
Brilliant. I need to jump as well. Thanks very much, guys. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Cool. Hey, Julian.
How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, you've been like core webinar guest. It's been
I get a badge.
Yeah, I'll send you one.
Hang on. Well, I was looking. Sorry, what I wanted to stay on for is, you know what we spoke about last week?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't work out to see if I'm in America or in the UK one.
Okay, Hannah, Julian dropped me a note the other day. He's having some questions relating to US terminology on the B Corp assessment. So I said, I think you're in the American version because it shouldn't be asking you those questions. But you don't think you are. You're thinking you're in the UK version.
I'm pretty certain I'm in the UK one. The issue is when it comes through to like assessment of building fit outs and that sort of thing, it starts talking about lead. Now, I know about lead. I did it lead with Adidas. It's American system rather than BREEAM.
Yeah.
I can't answer any of the questions yes, because then everything that falls off of that relates to lead and American sort of assessment systems. I can't score any points at all on the assessment.
Well, you're not... The assessment isn't there for you to answer every single question in every single section.
Oh, yeah. No, I understand that, but it feels like that whole of that section, I just couldn't answer anything.
You're on mute, Hannah.
It'd be difficult for me to say without looking at it, Julian, but like I said to you last time, if you're happy for me to look at it, or if you want to take out your financial information on it and then share it with me.
I've got no problem at all. You can if you know how to sign into it, sign into it. Do I have to give you a link or anything? Just tell me how to link it over to you.
Yeah, okay. So basically, when you're on the assessment, on the left-hand side, there's like a dashboard. If you scroll down, there's a settings one right at the bottom, and it says you can invite collaborators. So if you invite me as a collaborator, I will have a look at it this week for you and see if I think you've filled it in the wrong place. So if you could share it with me, it's just hannah@betternotstop.com. And then when you shared it with me, just send me a quick email and say, this is like, explain the bit that you're stuck on, and I'll have a look at it for you before Good Friday.